giving us your time to talk to you today. We're very excited for the discussion today, and we want to welcome you to Kigali Foreign Affairs Council. I want to remind everybody two things. One is we are on the record, which means this will be recorded. And second is we have now, as by now, 102 people. So we'll try to take as many questions as possible. Please start sending your questions now so we could start going through them. And I hope we can ask as many as possible. So, Ambassador, thank you again for giving us this opportunity. I want to start maybe on a historical note. This year marks 30 years anniversary of the German Reunification and the fall of the Berlin Wall. I want to ask you, what was the process of the reconciliation and what meant for Europe, and what's the impact today on Germany and Europe in general in the life and politics of today?
Well, yes, you know, thank you very much, Yannick, for this. And thank you for the opportunity. And let me recommend this initiative. That's one of the projects you wonder why they have not existed before.
Good point, me too. Same.
Okay, so no, that's a very, very difficult and broad question. So you have to interrupt me because I think on this topic I could talk for hours. Well, the thing is, you know, at my age, this is something, an event 30 years ago, which I remember very vividly. I was 29 years old at the time, so I remember that very vividly. And this year, indeed, it was the year 1990, a year of German reunification. But in fact, and you mentioned it, the process of this year started in November '89 with the fall of the wall. Perhaps let me first say, after the fall of the war, and even at the beginning of the year 1990, nobody really believed that German unification would be possible. I remember I had talks in East Germany in January 1990, and we were speaking about the vague possibility that East Germany, that GDR, might someday join the European Union. This was already very something perhaps a reality, but definitely not a reunification. At the beginning of the year 1990, this was not something we would have expected. Then things developed very quickly. Yes, and it was not the fall of the wall, I may say, meant not only a historic event for Germany, but of course for the whole of Europe. German reunification stands only as an example for European reunification. For our neighbors to the east, to Poland, to Czech and Slovak Republic, to the Baltic states, the year was perhaps even more important. They regained their sovereignty, they regained their freedom, they regained rule of law altogether. So this was something which was, as a reunification of Europe, went far beyond just a national event. Yes.
Go ahead.
To a certain extent, yes. To a certain extent, this is a process of reunification as well in Germany as in Europe. It's a process which is still ongoing. It's something which is not finished. We still see domestically in Germany, but in Europe as well, we're still talking about issues that came up as during this process of reunification. So this is something that has not left us, which is still ongoing. And I may say, I and most people at the time thought that reunification as such was not the most important issue. What was a lot more important is that our compatriots in Eastern Germany were freed from decades of suppression, of economic suppression, of social depression, of political depression. So at the beginning of the year 1990, we thought it would be fine if our compatriots in East Germany, if GDR became a liberal state with rule of law, which could someday join the European Union. This was something we thought we would have been satisfied at the beginning of the year 1990. What made things then happen so quickly in the course of the year 1990 was that especially the economic situation in East Germany turned out as being so catastrophic that we somehow had to rescue this second German state. Perhaps I stop here. Please ask for clarification.
We could have a tour on this. It's fascinating process itself. Let's now go to the current political situation. The last few years, we've been seeing an engagement of high-level officials from Germany with Africa than what we've seen before, including the Chancellor was in Africa, the Foreign Minister was in Africa, and other officials. I wanted to ask you, and actually the G20, the German presidency of G20 had a focus on Africa. I want to ask, how does Germany see Africa, and what's the Berlin strategy when it comes to Africa?
Well, it's not only the ones you mentioned, the Chancellor and our Minister, a lot of other ministers, including especially our Minister for Economic Cooperation. They have been traveling quite a number of times. And our President, Federal President Steinmeier, he has been here only recently, for example, in Kenya. Yes, there is, you're right, there is a growing interest in Germany, I would say even in Europe, in developments in Africa. For us, we often ask, what is the German agenda? And I'm glad you didn't use the word agenda, because I would not use it. Perhaps there's not really an agenda, because it always has the negative connotation of a negative agenda. No, but we do have a strategy, yes. And we have even more or less formulated it as guidelines for our Africa policy, which were passed last year, beginning of last year. Just to put it very briefly, what our interest is. Africa is our neighboring continent. So especially today, more than in history, more than before, our developments are closely interlinked. We can't separate our strategies, our agenda, our policies from each other. We are more than ever aware of the fact that we have to cooperate, that we are living in one world, especially as neighbors. So our strategy, which we have laid down in these guidelines for Africa, is that we see Africa, we see African countries as partners, as close partners, and we are working together. We are working as partners for big issues like global warming, like environment, and so on. Or now we see it in the pandemic. We work together for global issues. I think that's really a change of attitude. It's no longer the donor and recipient perspective, but the perspective of partnership. And this is something we have laid down. This is something that dominates, for example, the initiative you have mentioned, the Compact with Africa. This is behind what we have called the Marshall Plan for Africa. This is behind all these initiatives. We want looking for a new partnership, and moving away from just from the donor attitude, but cooperation. And especially we want to promote investment, private investment, and this is behind all the initiatives you've been mentioning. And this is the nucleus, the core of our guidelines for Africa, so our strategy.
So you touched the Marshall Plan and Compact with Africa, which is a very interesting initiative. But I want to, for the sake of time, I want a little bit to come back home and focus a little bit on what's the development cooperation between Rwanda and Germany looks like. What sector the embassy is involved or supporting in Rwanda.
Yes, I would say the development cooperation is the backbone of our bilateral of our bilateral relations altogether. It has a long history, dates back to to soon after the independence of Rwanda. It was only briefly interrupted with the events of the genocide against the Tutsi, and we were among those who returned first. I think we were even first returning in '94 with our development cooperation. So this is a long-standing tradition already. We have just had last month our bilateral negotiations on development cooperation for the next 2 years. They did not really end with a surprise. More or less, we're continuing what we have been doing over the last couple of years. And that means that in our cooperation, we concentrate on 2 or maybe 3 main areas. The first one is good governance and decentralization. Second is sustainable economic development and technical and vocational education and training. And as a third one, now during the last cooperation came up the issue of environment and climate protection. So these are the main pillars we pursue with our financial and with our technical cooperation. And I may recall this is not our choice, let me say. Rwanda, the government of Rwanda, is very much in the driving seat. And for example, only a couple of years ago, they have somehow allocated certain fields of cooperation to different donors, to different partners. So we are no longer, for example, in health, which we have been before, but these areas which I've mentioned, they were somehow allocated to us by the government of Rwanda.
So I want to touch something that just happened a few weeks ago. You signed an agreement with the government of Rwanda, and Berlin committed more than 100 billion francs for 2020-2022. I want to just check what areas the funding will be allocated to. Is this the same sector you just mentioned? Which sector getting more funding?
No, it's still the same. What is perhaps new is that we have reallocated a number of funds against the background of fighting against the pandemic. So we have been reallocating some funds this year. We will be doing more so next year. But for the rest, what I was saying is that we really concentrate on the areas that I've mentioned with our financial cooperation, which makes up to about 2/3 of our cooperation altogether, and 1/3 technical cooperation, which is mainly carried out by our implementing agency, GIZ. Okay. So there's not really much change. Perhaps I can give you an example of the third pillar I mentioned, climate protection, environment. In the framework of our financial cooperation, we are contributing to a very, very interesting project, and this is Green City Kigali. So this is something which is now just starting. If anybody's interested, I can give details, but this is a very, very fascinating project. I like it very much. It's a big project. And hopefully in 3 or 4 years' time, you will see why this is such an impressive, such a fascinating project.
You just touched this. I want to ask about GIZ and what's the relation between the embassy and GIZ, and also other institutes, in German institute that are based in Rwanda, and what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have mainly 2 implementing agencies for our development cooperation. This is GIZ for the technical cooperation and KFW for the financial cooperation. So these are the 2 main agencies we have for direct implementation of what we're doing. Where especially the presence of GIZ is quite impressive. If you see, we are here an embassy of a small embassy of a bit more than 20 colleagues. GIZ alone has about 150 colleagues. So this shows you the difference. And sometimes I say, when I'm together with the country director of GIZ, I point to him and say, here you see the man in the country who's really. But as I said, it's not only said, it's KfW, and our financial cooperation is even regarding volumes even bigger than this one. You may know we have a special case where you're asking that our development cooperation is under a different ministry. It's not under the ministry, in our case, in the German case, it's not under our Ministry of Foreign Affairs, it's not under Foreign Office, but under the Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development. And even they do not directly belong to the ministry, but they are, as I said, they are private companies, and they are implementing agencies, and they have projects from other donors from other countries, for example, as well. So not only from the German government. And having mentioned these two, they are not the only ones. There are other agencies here in Rwanda present as well. One, for example, is the Friedrich Ebert Foundation. They are mainly running projects together with civil society here. We do have the German Academic Exchange Service, and we must not forget that we have this special cooperation between the German federal state of Rhineland-Palatinate and Rwanda. This is something very unique. So there's a wide range of German presence here, and not to mention churches who are, for example, active here as well with a number of cooperation projects.
Interesting. So let's touch on investment and trade. And you mentioned a little bit about it, private investment. Which areas does German investment focus on in Rwanda? And actually, what's the investment look like between Rwanda and Germany?
Well, perhaps I have to disappoint you if you're asking for main areas of investment. Unfortunately, investments so far are not as big as they might be, and we here as the embassy and as the Rwandan government would like to see them. There are about 20-25 companies or business people present here, mainly small businesses. The most outstanding, perhaps not the biggest, but the most best known and most outstanding investment is the one by Volkswagen. It's 2 years old now, which is not really a big investment. They are assembling cars, you may know, here Volkswagen cars in the country. But the meaning for Rwanda is a lot bigger than the investment itself. It's significant for other countries as well, that a company like Volkswagen has gone to Rwanda, is investing there. I think the symbolic meaning is a lot bigger than the actual investment, and this is something that the government here has understood very well. The president, for example, is talking about this regularly, quite often, because it's supposed to be a model, an example for other companies as well. And and we do hope that other investors from Germany will follow soon. So far, the interest is a lot bigger than what actually translates into business, into investment. We do have, when traveling was still possible till early March this year, we had enormous amount of delegations coming here, mainly with a business background. And since then, it has picked up again, but unfortunately only as we're having it now in virtual conferences and virtual visits. But the interest is still very, very big, and it is there. And it's our common interest, together with the government of Rwanda, to translate this really into real investment, not just staying at expressing interest.
So I want to remind our audience, please keep sending your questions, and we'll take them in a few minutes. So Ambassador, you've been in Rwanda for 1 year, a few months, if I'm not wrong. What are your priorities for the next 2 years, the next or the rest of your time? What's your priority for the embassy?
Well, My first year was, of course, an unusual one, as for everybody else, and it proved once again how short-lived some plans may be. So what I originally had thought might be my priorities has, of course, been completely turned over by pandemic, by recent developments. So now I would say that for the next year, let's say that's the perspective I'm having now, to accompany Rwanda in its struggle to overcome the pandemic, first as a medical problem, but then especially to overcome the economic consequences, to assist there, to stay by our Rwandan partners. This is really something I would see for the time being as my priority for the next year, and I would be very, very happy if I'm leaving perhaps in 3 years' time, if I could say we really made a difference there, we made an impact there. And we have started that, we have been close partners again, but if we could achieve more over the next months and years, I think this really would be an ambition I would have now.
So you just mentioned COVID. Let's just talk a little bit the crisis. What's the embassy doing? I just saw a few days or yesterday actually, you were doing something with COVID. What's the embassy doing, helping in terms of COVID?
Yes, that's a very interesting development. I have already said for a couple of years as partners in economic cooperation and development, we have not been in the health sector. But still, I think we did now with combating the pandemic, we have played quite a crucial role from the very beginning. The background is that we had been in a close cooperation with regard to Ebola, preventing Ebola. So our Robert Koch Institute, which is the counterpart of RBC here, they had been in close contact, in cooperation, carrying out various projects together with regard to the preventing Ebola. And we could just, when the present pandemic, when COVID-19 was on the horizon, we could just turn this cooperation into the new challenge. And even before Rwanda had the very first case, we had people here from the Robert Koch Institute. They were training Rwandan partners in how to deal with this pandemic. They brought the very first test kits to Rwanda. So and ever since we have been very, very close. So the latest project in this context is the one you have been reading about yesterday. If I may say 2 words, because this is a very fascinating and very unique project. There is the possibility, and there has been done some research in Germany, I think in other European countries as well, that you can train dogs to sniff well, how do you say it? The COVID. Yeah, yes. They can recognize if somebody's infected or not.
Yes,
and this is something we want to cooperate now with the government of Rwanda. What we're doing now and what we signed yesterday an agreement upon is that we deliver a machine which somehow imitates this smell and where dogs can be trained on. So this is something for the next couple of weeks. The machine will come in 2 or 3 weeks' time, and then I understand that especially dogs, police-owned dogs, will be trained on that. And the authorities here are very, very optimistic that this really will be a big contribution here to the fight against the pandemic. You can just imagine, for example, you have a sports event and you have thousands of visitors, and you can just check with the dogs to identify is there somebody who's infected or not. So this might be a very, very successful project. We'll see. That's the latest in the context.
So we have 5 minutes left. So I want to start. I still have questions, but I want to take a question from the audience. I want to start with the first question from David. David has this question: is what are the challenges you see the world's going to face in the next 10 years, in your point of view? What are the challenges you're going to see the world face in the next 10 years? And he said, climate change, for example, what else?
I would say it more. I would look at this more from an institutional point of view. I think the biggest challenge we are facing for the years to come is to reinforce international cooperation in various aspects to fight climate change, to ensure sustainable development, sustainable economic development. This cannot be done bilaterally between two states. This cannot, of course, not be done by a state alone. This is where I see the main challenge that we have to further strengthen and develop international cooperation in existing fora in the African Union, in the EU, or together with the EU or in the United Nations. So a multilateral approach. This is something we really do need in the years to come, and this is something I would like to be strengthened. That's where I see the main challenge for the years to come.
Another question is from Dr. Egidia. She asked, Germany is very known to have a good education system. Are you doing anything in the education system in Rwanda to build partnership between universities in Germany and Rwanda?
Yes, in fact, there are already quite a number of partnerships between universities, different backgrounds, quite a number of them in the context, the framework of this partnership between Rhineland-Palatinate, the federal state, and Rwanda. But I would say the main focus in this regard is on vocational training and education. That's where we have, as partners, the main focus and have had this over many years. We do have we have school partnerships and so on, but the main focus is vocational training.
So this is actually interesting because somebody asked a question about vocational training. Maybe I could ask, it says, how do we change the culture of vocational training to be seen as something good, not as something for people who fail the traditional education? So basically, how do we change the culture to encourage people to see vocational training as not as somebody who failed the traditional education, but actually as another path to success, having a career?
Yes, I think there often is a misunderstanding. Perhaps for us that's a special case that we have a tradition of vocational training, in fact dating back hundreds of years. So there's a long tradition going on. I think in many cases, and there's a tendency in my country as well, to overvaluate academic education. I think for a country like Rwanda, what do you do if you have with tens of thousands of people leaving university, not finding a job? It's much more important, or at least, let's say, at least as important, to have people who have been well trained in vocational training and education. I think that's for a country like Rwanda, for many other countries, that's something even more important, or at least as important as academic education at universities. But yes, there's a cultural issue that often this vocational training is somehow, the esteem is not as high as for university academic education. But I think this is a mindset that has to be changed.
To be changed. All right, so I want to take the last question, and before we finish the sake of the time, the last question is from Manzi. And what are two factors that contributed to Germany being a successful economically? Sorry. One or two factors.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, sorry, you were interrupted. Some of the sound. I did not get the end of what you said.
No, the question was, what are one or two factors that contributed to Germany being a successful economically?
Okay. I think first of all, that's really a German workforce and expertise. But it just leads back to what I've been talking about, this vocational training, that we have this very, very long tradition dating back hundreds of years ago. And with industrialization coming, we really had a kind of advantage that we had this background this was certainly the biggest advantage. Perhaps the question aims at our development after the Second World War, when we had this very quick recovery, which was then by the time often called the economic wonder that happened. I think there were mainly two reasons. There was a stable environment which we had in the period after the war. We still could count on this expertise, and we had capital coming in. For example, we mentioned the Marshall Plan for Africa, which of course has as a model the American Marshall Plan for post-war Europe, which provided credits, which provided loans, money for development, and this was a very big advantage. We had the stable environment, the expertise we had, plus the trust by donors from abroad at the time, especially from the US, and this combination is a main explanation for our success, I would say.
Ambassador, we ran out of time and I still have like 9-10 questions, but thank you very much for your time. We really appreciate it and having this opportunity to learn about the work that Germany invests in Rwanda and also the relationship between the two countries. Everybody, thanks for joining us at Kigali Foreign Affairs Council. Always to have you, Ambassador. You're welcome anytime. And I hope after COVID, we'll have a personal conversation where we could take more questions and engage more deeply into some of the subject we touched on. But thank you very much, Ambassador.
Thank you, Yannick, for having me, and all the best for this project. As I said, it's really unique one, and all the best.
Thank you, Ambassador. Okay. Thank you. Have a good one. Bye.